Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat across from her, maybe at the edge of a conversation, or maybe at the brink of silence, and thought to yourself, does she even realize what she's doing to me? Not just in words, not just in what she says, but in how she withholds her attention, her softness, her vulnerability. One moment she's there, and the next, it's like loving a shadow, and you feel it, that slow erosion of your presence, like you're being unchosen in small, imperceptible ways. You've tried being honest, you've tried being kind, you've pleaded for clarity, for connection. But now something in you has changed. You're not trying to hurt her, but you need her to feel the weight of her actions. You want her to notice your silence the way you noticed hers. You want her to sit with the emptiness she created and wonder if maybe, just maybe, she went too far. This isn't about playing games. It's about reclaiming power, not with loudness, not with rage, but with precision, with intention. This is the art of reverse psychology. 5 subtle, powerful shifts in how you show up, not to break her, but to awaken her. Because sometimes the most powerful response is the one that doesn't look like a response at all. Have you ever been in a relationship where your presence became so constant, so dependable, that it began to vanish in her eyes? You show up, you care, you try, you give and give, until one day you find yourself wondering if she even notices anymore. Not because you want applause, not because you're asking for her to worship you, but because even the strongest man begins to fade when he's no longer seen. There is a unique ache in loving someone who has forgotten how to value your emotional labor. And here's the paradox. When you confront her, she pulls away. When you pursue clarity, she retreats into vagueness. When you ask for emotional accountability, she frames it as neediness. So what do you do when love turns into a slow burning imbalance? You don't yell, you don't beg, you shift, subtly, silently, strategically. You begin to speak in the language she truly listens to, not with words but with energy. And this, my friend, is where reverse psychology begins. Because sometimes, to make her understand what she's taken for granted, you have to do the exact opposite of what she expects. Not to manipulate, but to invite reflection. Not to punish in the cruel sense, but to create space where your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. Let's talk about the first shift. It's what I call the disappearing mirror. You see, most women are used to being reflected, mirrored by the man they're with. You notice her moods. You adjust your tone when she's distant. You offer softness when she's cold. You fill the room when she withdraws. In essence, you become the mirror that keeps her emotional experience intact. But what happens when you stop reflecting? Not with cruelty, not with passive aggression, just stillness. You become emotionally neutral. She's distant. You don't chase. She's moody. You don't ask what's wrong. She makes a subtle jab. You don't react. Not with silence that screams resentment, but with a kind of serene detachment that says, I've stopped dancing around your chaos. And at first she might not notice. She may even double down, trying to test you further. But eventually something shifts. The emotional mirror she's always relied on, it's gone. And suddenly she's left with only her own reflection. That right there is uncomfortable and powerful. You're no longer orbiting her moods. You've become the sun, and she has to find her own center of gravity. It's not about being cold. It's about being unfazed. It's about communicating. Without saying a word, you don't get to dictate my emotional climate anymore. And this leads naturally into the second shift, which is just as subtle, but deeply disorienting for her. It's what I call selective absence. This one is important, because when a woman knows she has your time, your attention, your presence, whenever she wants it, she may not cherish it. Not because she's cruel, but because certainty can breed indifference. Think of how easy it is to take oxygen for granted until you're gasping for air. So what do? You create gaps, not dramatic disappearances, not ghosting, but moments where she reaches out and you're not immediately available. You're not cold. You're just occupied with your purpose, with your life, with people who do make you feel seen. This isn't to make her jealous. It's to make her curious. You don't explain. You don't justify. You let her feel the slight shift in your availability. And that shift makes her pause, because now your attention is no longer guaranteed. It's not a constant stream. It's a conscious choice. And here's the key. When you do show up, you're warm, present, but it's clear that your world is no longer orbiting hers. That unpredictability, that hint of distance, it stirs something ancient in her. The part of her that wants to earn closeness again, that remembers your value not because you reminded her, but because she felt your absence. These two shifts, disappearing mirror and selective absence, they're not about punishment, they're about contrast. Because when love becomes too comfortable, too predictable, it can lose its texture. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the relationship and for your own self-respect is to reintroduce gravity. consequence, intrigue. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like game playing, I want to offer a different perspective. This isn't about manipulation. This is about mature boundaries. Because when a woman disrespects your emotional investment the old way, the pleading, the over-explaining, the emotional lectures, they don't land, they only drain you. But when you withdraw the very energy she's been absorbing without gratitude, something remarkable happens. She feels the void, and not because you shouted into it, but because you left it. Let's go back to the emotional mirror. Imagine she's used to you lighting the room with your attention. She knows you'll always check in, ask how she's feeling, show up even when she's emotionally absent. She's grown accustomed to a kind of emotional concierge, someone who's always attuned. But suddenly you're quiet, not angry, not distant, just still. She texts and you reply a little later than usual. She makes a passive comment to bait a reaction, and you smile lightly and change the subject. She throws emotional hooks and they don't catch anything. It's unnerving, because now the dynamic has flipped. And in that disorientation, she has a choice to look inward or to step up. And if she doesn't, you've already reclaimed your power. Now, when you add selective absence to the mix, it's like adding mystery to your presence. She doesn't know exactly where she stands. She can't predict you. And in that unpredictability, her mind begins to spiral a little. Why isn't he responding like he used to? Is he pulling away? Did I do something? Has he stopped caring? But you haven't stopped caring. You've just stopped over-giving. And this shift, this deliberate emotional restraint, it activates something different in her. The part of her that begins to wonder if maybe she's the one who has to close the gap now. And here's what's beautiful about this approach: it restores dignity. Yours first and foremost, because instead of becoming reactive, you become intentional. And in that space, you give her the opportunity to reflect, something no amount of confrontation could ever force. So much of reverse psychology in relationships isn't about control, it's about clarity. When a woman can no longer predict your behavior, she's forced to confront hers. When you remove your emotional sponsorship, she has to examine whether she's been earning it or simply expecting it. And in that moment of disorientation, a mirror is placed in front of her, not the one you used to hold, but the one she now has to face on her own. That's power, quiet, clean, unapologetic. And it's only the beginning. There's something quietly dignified about a man who no longer makes himself easy to reach when he feels unappreciated. It doesn't mean he shuts down or turns to stone. It means he finally begins to reserve his warmth for places where it's reciprocated. And that's the shift she never sees coming. Because for so long, she's believed your love was automatic, expected, safe. But now it's conditional, not petty, just principled. And that's what takes us to the third shift, a deeper psychological layer. This one, it lives in contrast. It's what I call giving her the opposite. You know her expectations. You know the little games she plays. Maybe she expects you to be the one who reaches out first every time. Or she counts on you to be the one who initiates the heart-to-heart conversations after an argument. Or she knows you'll always be available to soothe her emotional storms, even if she started them. But now, you begin to pivot. She pulls back emotionally. Instead of rushing to pull her closer, you let the distance hang in the air. She expects you to bring resolution. You offer none. You go on with your day. She's used to being chased. You stand still. This isn't about being stubborn. It's about breaking a pattern. A pattern that taught her she could create emotional disconnection, and you would do the work of reconnecting. So you give her the opposite. She flirts with indifference. You respond with serene focus on something else. Your business, your health, your creativity. She throws a subtle dig to provoke you. You laugh gently, not mockingly, and redirect your energy. What happens next is almost always the same. The game short circuits, because you're no longer playing it. And when she no longer has the power to predict your response, she has two choices: escalate or evolve. And here's where things get fascinating. If she chooses to escalate, trying to bait you into an emotional tug-of-war, she only reveals her emotional immaturity. That's your clarity. That's your invitation to rise above and move on with grace. But if she evolves, if she pauses, reflects, and adjusts, you'll notice it, not in grand apologies, but in small signals. Her tone softens. Her presence becomes more intentional. She begins to reach out instead of pulling away. And not because you demanded it, but because you created space for her to feel the absence of your emotional labor. Now, let's deepen that further with the fourth shift. This one is subtle, surgical, and incredibly powerful when done with emotional maturity. It's called strategic praise. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Praise. Why would I praise someone who's hurt me, who's ignored me, who's taken me for granted? Because this isn't about flattery. This is about contrast, precision. You begin to reserve your compliments not for her beauty, her charm, or her default traits, but for the moments when she actually shows up differently. Let's say she finally listens to you with presence instead of defensiveness. That's when you say, I really appreciate how you heard me just now. That meant something. Or maybe she initiates a check-in, or she takes responsibility for something, or she leans into emotional intimacy without you having to ask. That's when you acknowledge it, not dramatically but sincerely. Your praise becomes a mirror. This is what I value. This is what draws me closer. And the brilliance of this shift, it rewires the dynamic, because now your validation is no longer free. It's no longer tied to how she looks or how much she tempts you. It's tied to how she treats you, how she honors your emotional experience. She learns, perhaps for the first time, that your affection isn't permanent, it's earned. And that changes everything. She may not even be fully aware of it at first, but it creates a subtle recalibration. She begins to attune herself to the version of her that brings out your warmth. Not because you threatened her, but because you trained her through kindness and clarity, that respect is the pathway to intimacy. And I want you to hold that, because this isn't about being calculating. This is about emotional leadership. You're not punishing to punish. You're revealing a standard. And the beauty of reverse psychology is that it's not about force, it's about invitation through contrast. The power of strategic praise is that it gently exposes what used to go unnoticed. When she does something shallow or self-centered, you remain neutral. But when she brings depth, effort, or vulnerability, you affirm it. And in that shift, she feels her behavior land with you differently. Suddenly, she can no longer rely on her looks, her charm, or the familiarity of the relationship to carry her. She has to show up with intention. And if she doesn't, she knows she's no longer the woman who gets the best of you. This is emotional adulthood, and it's rare. Now, let me bring you deeper into why all of this works, not just practically, but psychologically. When a woman takes a man for granted, it's often because she believes she has nothing left to lose. Your presence is a given. Your patience is infinite. Your forgiveness is built in. But the moment you begin to change the rhythm, the moment your reactions become unpredictable, your energy more guarded, your affection more earned, she begins to doubt the stability of your submission. And that doubt, that healthy uncertainty, becomes the pressure that sharpens her awareness. It's what makes her wonder, did I cross a line? Did I push too far? Is he slowly outgrowing me? And she might not voice these questions aloud, but they'll echo inside her, because the version of you she could once control with distance, or silence, or attitude, that version is gone. You've evolved. And she now has to meet you in that evolution, or be left behind by it. And here's what makes this work sustainably. You're not doing this out of bitterness. You're doing it from clarity. You're choosing calm over chaos, boundaries over battles, depth over drama. When she expects you to lose it and you stay calm, that's power. When she expects you to chase and you stay still, that's power. When she expects a reaction and you give reflection instead, that's not just power, that's transformation. And she feels it in her gut, in the way you no longer arbit her moods, in the way you no longer entertain her drama, in the way you've become a man who doesn't just love, but requires reciprocity. Now, when you combine the third shift, giving her the opposite with the fourth, strategic praise, you create a new emotional ecosystem, one where love is still possible, still alive, but no longer unconditional. In the face of disrespect, you're not withdrawing to hurt her, you're withdrawing to heal you. You're not creating silence to punish her. You're creating silence to reclaim yourself. And that subtle difference, it makes all the difference. There comes a point in a man's life when he realizes that peace is more powerful than persuasion. That nothing, no connection, no desire, no memory is worth sacrificing your self-respect for. And when that realization settles into your bones, something profound happens. You begin to choose silence not as retreat, but as clarity. You begin to value distance not as punishment, but as perspective, which brings us to the final shift. It's the most delicate, the most subtle, and yet it's the one that changes the energy between you completely. It's what I call controlled vulnerability. This one may feel counterintuitive, especially after creating space, withholding praise, and giving her the unexpected. But listen carefully, because this is where emotional maturity elevates everything you've done so far. Controlled vulnerability is when you give her a glimpse, not a flood, of your inner world. You let her see the man behind the stillness, the man behind the retreat, the man who didn't just pull away out of strategy, but because something inside of him hurt. Let me paint a picture. She asks why you've been distant, and instead of brushing it off or making her feel guilty, you look at her calmly and say something like, there was a moment when I felt like I didn't matter anymore, not because you said it, but because of how easily I was dismissed. And I realized I had to protect the part of me that kept showing up, even when I felt invisible. That kind of vulnerability, it's not weak, it's surgical. It cuts through her defenses. It bypasses her ego. Because it's not blaming, it's revealing. You're not punishing her with silence anymore, you're inviting her to see you. And here's the twist. This vulnerability doesn't come at the beginning. It comes after you've shifted the dynamic, after she's felt your distance, after she's noticed your absence. That's when your truth lands the deepest. Because now, your words are no longer filtered through desperation. They're delivered with dignity. Controlled vulnerability is what transforms this from a tactic into a teaching moment. You're not just withdrawing to protect yourself. You're opening just enough to let her understand why the withdrawal happened. Not in a lecture, not in a speech, in a sentence, a truth, a look. And when done correctly, it has the power to create a seismic shift in her emotional awareness. She suddenly realizes you weren't trying to play her, you were protecting yourself. She realizes you didn't go cold, you went quiet because you needed space to hear your own voice again. She realizes she lost access to your heart not because you stopped loving her, but because she stopped honoring that love. And now, she sees what she couldn't before. She sees the version of you she once took for granted. And that realization, it doesn't just sting, it humbles her. Because here's the thing, true punishment, the kind that creates real reflection, is never loud, it's never harsh, it's never petty, it's clean, precise, almost surgical in its quiet impact. And all 5 of these shifts work because they're not about revenge, they're about recalibration. You withhold the mirror she used to validate herself. Introduce selective absence that breeds curiosity. Give her the opposite of what she expects, creating emotional contrast. Offer praise only when she earns it, showing what actually draws you in. And finally, reveal your heart, but with boundaries, not surrender. It's not about turning into someone you're not. It's about returning to who you've always been before you started shrinking yourself to keep her comfortable. You know, we often think that love means proving ourselves, showing we're reliable, patient, forgiving, and yes, love is patient, love is kind, but love without standards, that's not love. That's servitude wrapped in romantic loyalty. A man who practices these shifts doesn't become cruel, he becomes clear, he becomes a mirror, not for her vanity, but for her character. And she either rises or reveals that she never intended to. Now here's the beautiful part, sometimes these shifts wake something in her. Sometimes the absence of your old self, the predictable, available, ever-giving self leads to a kind of rebirth in the relationship. She begins to reapproach you, not with performance, but with presence, not with seduction, but with sincerity. And when that happens, if that happens, you'll know, because her words will carry humility, her energy will soften, her defenses will lower, not because she fears losing you, but because she realizes she deserves to. Other times, she won't get it. She'll play the victim. She'll accuse you of being distant, confusing, manipulative. And if that's her reaction, then you've been gifted something powerful, clarity. You'll know, finally, that the connection you were fighting to save was never mutual. And that's okay, because now, you're no longer a man who begs for connection. You're a man who requires alignment, who doesn't just fall in love, but chooses who gets access to the most sacred parts of his soul. Controlled vulnerability is what lets you walk away, not in bitterness, but in truth. And let me say this, because maybe no one ever has before. It's okay to want her to feel your absence. It's okay to want her to notice your worth. It's okay to create consequences, not out of cruelty, but out of care for your own heart. That's not manipulation. That's maturity. That's what it means to love from a place of power instead of performance. And in the end, whether she comes back changed or walks away unchanged, you've already won. Because you finally stopped abandoning yourself to be chosen. And that's the real shift. There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't roar. It doesn't arrive with ultimatums or punishments. It doesn't shout, you hurt me, or demand, you need to change. It simply stops. Stops performing, stops pleading, stops offering what was once unconditional access to your heart, not to inflict pain, but to create presence. And it is that strength, quiet, contained, deeply rooted, that shifts everything. Because when you stop responding the way she expects you to, she begins to feel the gravity of her own emotional carelessness. You're no longer the man who hands over his peace like a gift she didn't earn. You become the man who requires reciprocity before offering connection. And that's not toxic. That's not cold. That's called emotional integrity. When you implement these reverse psychology shifts, subtle, powerful, and intentional, something begins to happen inside of you. This isn't just about changing how she behaves. This is about recalibrating your inner compass. About recognizing the parts of you that have overgiven for too long and finally choosing to reclaim the pieces you've lost. Let's pause here for a moment, because before we can talk about results, what she thinks, what she feels, what she'll do, we have to talk about you, who you become when you stop chasing validation, when you stop explaining your worth, when you stop trying to keep peace with someone who's been breaking it in the subtlest ways. You become clear, and with clarity comes peace, and with peace comes confidence, not the loud, performative kind. The quiet confidence of a man who knows what he brings to the table and no longer needs to beg someone to sit across from him. You begin to walk differently. You begin to speak with a tone that doesn't chase, it chooses. You show up not to prove, but to connect, and you stop apologizing for the standards that protect your energy. This shift is magnetic, because when you're no longer desperate for a woman's approval, she feels it. And while some women will run from that, because it makes them feel out of control, the right woman, the emotionally available woman, she leans in, because deep down what healthy women crave isn't a man who always says yes. It's a man who says no when his values are on the line. A man who can walk away, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. That's the core of this entire conversation. Because let's be honest, most men aren't taught how to punish with boundaries. They're taught how to punish with anger or withdrawal or revenge. But none of that creates respect. It creates fear, resentment, distance. What we're talking about here is not revenge. It's revelation. It's saying, this is how I show up when I'm valued. And this is what happens when I'm not. No threats, no manipulation, just a quiet exit from old patterns. And that's where the punishment becomes poetic. Because she begins to feel the weight of what she dismissed. Not because you said, you'll regret losing me, but because you became someone who doesn't tolerate emotional carelessness. Someone who doesn't argue anymore, because he doesn't need to. You've stopped fighting to be heard, because now you only invest where there's listening. You've stopped proving your love, because now you offer it only where it's honored. You've stopped giving your best to someone who's only showing up with just enough to keep you hooked. And that's what changes you. That's what makes this journey so much more than a strategy. It becomes a transformation. Now here's the twist. This transformation doesn't just affect her. It affects every relationship that follows. Because once you've tasted the dignity of loving yourself more than your need to be chosen, you never go back. You no longer stay in rooms where you have to shrink. You no longer chase people who make you question your worth. You no longer tolerate a love that starves you slowly. You become selective, not from fear, but from fullness. And this fullness, it attracts a different kind of woman. A woman who doesn't confuse stillness with disinterest. A woman who doesn't punish vulnerability. A woman who's not threatened by your power, but inspired by it. Because now you've raised the bar not for her, but for you. You've realized that the man who used reverse psychology to shift the dynamic wasn't just trying to teach her a lesson. He was learning his own. He was learning what it means to be emotionally sovereign, to give love without losing himself in it, to offer connection but only to those who match his energy, his effort, his depth. And that is where true power lives. So as you reflect on these shifts, the disappearing mirror, the selective absence, the giving of the opposite, the strategic praise, and the controlled vulnerability, ask yourself, which version of me am I becoming? Am I the man who's still begging her to notice me? Or am I the man who's finally noticed himself? Because that awareness, that's what makes her pay attention. Not because you forced her to, but because you became too powerful to ignore. She'll remember how it used to be, how easily she could pull you in with her silence, how effortlessly she could throw you off with a mood, how predictably you reacted to her distance. And now, she's met a different man. A man who doesn't just want her, he chooses when to let her in. A man who doesn't need to chase because his life is full. A man who no longer reacts because he's grounded in self-respect. And if she's wise, she'll rise to meet that man. If she's not, she'll blame your calm for the storm she created. Either way, you've already won, because now you know the difference between punishing with ego and punishing with elegance. And elegance always leaves a deeper imprint. There's a moment, quiet, subtle, deeply personal, when you realize you no longer want revenge. You don't want her to hurt the way she hurt you. You don't even need her to apologize anymore. What you want is something far more sacred. You want to be free, free from the grip of over-explaining yourself, free from the ache of being misunderstood, free from the exhausting cycle of giving your whole self to someone who keeps you at arm's length. And this is the final evolution of reverse psychology. Not a trick, not a tactic, but a return to emotional freedom. Because the goal was never to manipulate her into loving you more. It was to love yourself enough to stop convincing her. So if she comes back to you now, after your silence, your distance, your calm refusal to react, she's not coming back to the same man. She's coming back to a man who knows how to protect his peace, who knows how to guard his emotional gates, who knows the cost of letting someone stay in his life while treating his love like it was disposable. And if she doesn't come back, let her go. Let her keep walking, because you didn't lose her. You released her. You stopped trying to prove that you were worthy of being loved, and you started living as if you already knew it. That's the final lesson, that the real punishment, the real shift, isn't in her tears, her confusion, or her sudden apologies. It's in your transformation. It's in the way you no longer collapse under the weight of rejection. It's in the way you rise, not with vengeance, but with vision. You become the man who speaks with fewer words, but more impact. You become the man who walks away, not to hurt, but to heal. You become the man who no longer chases chaotic love, because you've finally fallen in love with something deeper, your own peace. And here's something most men don't hear enough. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your desire to be seen, heard, and valued, that's not neediness. That's emotional maturity. But emotional maturity without boundaries becomes emotional servitude. And that's the prison you've now escaped. Reverse psychology, when done with dignity, isn't manipulation, it's re-education. It teaches her silently that your love is not something to be disrespected. It teaches you that your peace is not something to be negotiated. And maybe one day, she'll sit alone with the weight of her silence and realize she lost a man who was willing to go to war for her heart, until he realized the war was costing him his own. That's not your burden anymore. You've outgrown the need to fix someone who doesn't doesn't want to grow with you. You've outgrown the habit of offering softness to someone who doesn't feel the need to earn it. And most importantly, you've outgrown the identity of being the one who always bends, always waits, always forgives before being asked, because you've reclaimed the most powerful thing a man can possess, discernment. You no longer confuse attraction with alignment, chemistry with compatibility, desire with devotion. You've stopped mistaking the chaos of emotional highs and lows for passion. And you've begun to crave something deeper, stability, reciprocity, peace, not because you've gone cold, but because your soul has matured. And maybe the old you wouldn't have understood this. The one who kept texting when she ignored you. The one who kept explaining himself in paragraphs while she replied in single syllables. The one who thought that love meant suffering, proving, sacrificing. But that version of you, he's gone. Not because he was weak, but because he was tired of trying to bloom in soil that was never meant to hold him. And now you walk different. You breathe different. You don't chase, you attract. You don't argue, you observe. You don't react, you recalibrate. And if she ever circles back, unsure, confused, suddenly remembering your value, don't gloat, don't punish. Don't even say, I told you so. Just remember, you didn't change to win her back. You changed to never lose yourself again. Because that's what punishment really is. Not about making someone suffer, but about revealing who you become when you stop tolerating less than you deserve. It's poetic, it's precise, and it's yours. Now, if this message stirred something in you, if you recognized yourself in these shifts, or if you're on the edge of reclaiming your emotional power, don't keep this to yourself. Share it. Comment below. Speak the truth you've been carrying in silence. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because on this channel, we're not just talking about relationships. We're rewriting what it means to be a powerful, emotionally intelligent man in a world that often tells you to suppress your depth. You deserve connection that reflects your growth. You deserve love that honors your sensitivity without exploiting it. You deserve to feel safe, not just strong. And most of all, you deserve to stop begging for what should be given freely. So here's to you, to the man who no longer punishes with anger, but with absence, who no longer reacts with rage, but with retreat, who no longer explains endlessly, but expresses selectively, to the man who has finally learned it, she only changes when you do. And now you have